Welcome back to Wemcast. My name's Will Duffin, Education Lead and General Practitioner. On this episode, which is a special episode, I am talking to Dr. Bryony Pointon. Now, many of us adventurous types are stuck back at home or working in a local hospital during lockdown, but there is one extreme medic who's out there, and she's speaking to us today 10,000 miles away from her normal home in Chichester. She's on the JCR, the James Clark Ross research vessel with the British Antarctic Survey, and she's currently on her way down to the Rothera research station. So she's very, very far south. So we're going to chat to Bryony, and we're going to get a feel from her on how things are going. And before we do that, I'll just tell you a little bit about Bryony. So she spent 9 years in the Royal Navy as a GP. She served in Afghanistan and Kosovo, as well as on various ships. And she left the Royal Navy to find more adventure. And in the following 8 years, she's worked on cruise ships. She's been on the Doctor on expeditions to places like Namibia, Honduras, Papua New Guinea. She's worked on TV shows. She's done all kinds of interesting things. And this current trip, she's on her way down to Antarctica. This is actually her third time on an Antarctic ship as the ship's doctor. So really, really great to have you on the podcast, Bryony. You're very, very welcome. How are you?
Thanks, Will. Yeah, I'm very good. Thanks. Yeah, we're just currently sailing across the Drake's Passage, and it's calmer than normal, so all's good at the moment.
Yeah, good. But I understand there might be some weather coming in.
Yeah, it's meant to be getting a bit rougher later, which is normal for the Drake's Passage, and I'm going to be crossing it about 8 times this time. And the first time, it was particularly rough. The crew said rougher than they've had for the last 2 years, and a few things crashing about, and most things survived, I think. Though, yeah.
Yeah, good. Yes, and tell us a little bit about the ship that you're on.
So I'm on the James Clark Ross. It's at the moment, it's the only British Antarctic Survey ship. Usually there were 2, and soon we're going to have the Sir David Attenborough, the big new one. It's a research ship, so it will normally have scientists on, but we don't have anyone at the moment, and they'll be doing all sorts of marine science. And it's also to bring cargo in and out of all the bases down here in Antarctica and in sub-Antarctica as well. So it's very much a working ship down south. It also works in the Arctic for the other half of the year sometimes as well.
I see. So is it in constant operation throughout the year?
It has sometimes when it's resting and being in refit. So after this, it will go back to the UK for a little bit, and then over to Denmark, I think, for some work. But it does often work in the Arctic in our summer.
How many crew are on board at the moment, Bryony?
So it's nice and quiet at the moment. We've only got about 30 crew, which is the normal amount of crew. They are getting a little bit... they were meant to change crew about 2 weeks ago and be heading home to the UK, but due to the circumstances, they didn't want to bring in 30 new people from the UK and other parts of the world, potentially bring any infection with them. So yeah, about 30 at the moment.
Yeah, okay. And you mentioned infection. Clearly, the rest of the world is in pandemic. That must be a real challenge, keeping the threat of coronavirus away from the research stations and the operations down there in general. How are you managing to do that?
So I mean, that is really the focus at the moment, is very much getting the people that aren't meant to be wintering, because the winter season is starting out, and keeping the virus out of Antarctica and the islands. So things have changed from the original plan a lot. So yeah, we're not bringing any new people in. I was the last person to come in, and I was quite high risk and very much monitored for the first couple of weeks. And so no new people. There were meant to be about 50 new people. Even the station leader, who was meant to be going down, has been turned around because he's been in the Falkland Islands and deemed too high a risk. The ship takes its time to get down there, so we've usually got a couple of weeks in between stops to see if any symptoms come. When we're at the Falkland Islands, we haven't been allowed off at all. We bring cargo on, wash it down, or leave it aside for a while and keep 2 meters apart if we have had to be anywhere near anyone. What else have we done? So in Rothera, you have planes going in. they've only had one plane, and the pilots are quarantined on both sides, and they've actually stopped doing that as well because of the risk. When we went to the islands, when they are keeping people on there, we've just anchored off and taken cargo to and from, rather than sending anyone ashore. And Rothera, we did go into the brand new wharf. They've built a new wharf there, first people to use it. But not allowed in any of the buildings, can't touch anything. We were allowed ashore to certain areas, but had to keep that 2 meters distance. And this was after 3 weeks of being isolated on the ship, but just in case, because we don't know about maybe asymptomatic carriage or anything, So, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So even though Antarctica supposedly is the only continent currently on Earth without any confirmed COVID cases, it's still far from safe.
Yeah, I mean, if you get it in there, it's just going to spread so quickly. You do have a doctor or two down there, but they've got limited medical facilities and limited ways of getting it out. So it would just be pretty bad if it did get down there. So,
do you have access to, say, intensive care and ventilators if there was an outbreak and there were sick patients?
So there's a small medical facility because you are cut off in the winter. So 4 years ago, I did winter in Antarctica, in Rothera. So I had 18 months down there and spent a winter there. You're the only doctor. In the summer, there's 2 doctors. And usually you wouldn't be able to get people out, or it would take several weeks if you needed to. So when I was down there, we did have a ventilator and anaesthetic facilities. But I'm not an anaesthetist, and most of the doctors down there aren't. Some of them are. We have taken the anaesthetic stuff out, but I think there might still be a ventilator. But still, you've got a limited supply of oxygen. You can't there's no resupply of the oxygen. We've got oxygen concentrators. There's just one doctor. There's only going to be one person that could be put on a ventilator. It is fairly limited. It's sort of set up for sort of maybe one urgent person at a time, although we do look at sort of mass major incidents occasionally, but that's more trauma rather than this sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay. And what are the medical facilities like on the ship, on the JCR?
So I've got a little, I call it a surgery, but it's a little sick bay. We don't have a ventilator. We've got a bag and mask. You sort of sit there and do that for a while until we get anywhere. We've got medication. We can intubate potentially, but it's sort of an advanced sort of first aid with medication for a doctor when there's a doctor on board. And then we'd be looking at getting somewhere where we can get more advanced treatment.
Yeah. And are you, so you've got 30 crew on board, presumably you're providing primary care for them. Have you been quite busy or fairly quiet? How have things been?
It's been very quiet. I feel very guilty that I am probably the least worked medic in the world at the moment. Yes, I do primary care. You get the odd patient, but with 30 fairly healthy people on, it's quiet. So a lot of it is just being here. You're here just in case, because once you go 60 degrees south, you have to have a doctor on board ships in case something happens. Daily temperature checks is my main thing at the moment. We've been asked by so when we're taking all the people out of Antarctica, we're dropping them off at a small cruise ship that we've chartered where they can be isolated and stay on, and they've requested that we do daily temperature checks on everyone. So that's one of their criteria.
Yeah, wow. And do you have a kind of, if say that you were measuring high temperatures and you were suspecting that coronavirus was on board, do you have a kind of a plan of action for that?
Well, we have rough plans. The problem is once it's on a ship, it is just going to spread around. We can't isolate the air for a start, and everyone touches everything, especially when it gets rough. I mean, when I first came on, I thought, right, I'm an infection risk. I won't shake hands with anyone. I won't touch anything, and I wash my hands and do all of that. But as soon as we set sail, I mean, you have to, for your own safety, you have to be grabbing hold of everything. Everyone eats together, so it's extremely difficult to isolate anyone. The fact is that we are pretty much zero risk at the moment. We haven't let anyone ashore. We've all been using sort of maximum things. So, yes, would have to just isolate the ship as a whole, I think, rather than anything else.
Yes, I understand. Yeah, I mean, you'll be returning to shore in a very changed world.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
tell us in general terms, this coronavirus aside, what's your kind of CASEVAC plan from the ship?
So the ship would have to move. We'd have to use the ship basically to sail to either the Falkland Islands, which is the nearest place to us at the moment, which and they have a larger medical facility there, um, or Punta Arenas would be the other place to go to, but probably to the Falklands and then fly out from there. And then we'll just be keeping people on the ship. Yeah.
So how long would it take to sail from, if you're in Rothera, your most southern point, back to across the Drake's Passage, across the Southern Ocean, back to the Falklands Islands? How long would that take?
If the sea conditions were reasonable, it takes about 5 or 6 days to do that. So in the winter, you wouldn't be able to do that.
True remote medicine.
Yes, yeah, you are cut off, and I say in the winter it's even more cut off. You have to assume, and you tell everyone that's going down there that you won't be able to be medevaced out. They have done medevacs. It takes days or weeks to organise. So, yeah.
So if you do have a sick patient, you are looking at some significantly prolonged field care before you can get them to definitive care.
Yes, yeah, and I've luckily it didn't happen to me. My friend who was working at Halley, it happened to her, and it's extremely stressful. You are the doctor, the only qualified medic there. You've got advanced first aiders, but obviously that's not quite the same thing. You're in charge of them, and you've got this person to look after for days and weeks who could potentially be deteriorating over that time.
Yes, and you I understand we're involved in a medevac from the Halley Research Station. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so again, I was more of a sort of drop-off point halfway. So to get anyone out of Halley or Rothera in the winter, it has to be by plane because the sea ice means you can't sail anywhere near. So it's just all iced up around. All the planes are up in Canada, so the planes have to come down to Punta Arenas. You have to get the pilots over. You have to get doctors over to do the medevac. So they did all that. This was taking, as I say, days or a couple of weeks really. And then they fly to Rothera because we've got the airfield here, and they have to stop to refuel. You have to wait for good conditions. Luckily, when this one happened, there were good enough conditions that they could actually fly straight to Rothera and then refuel and fly straight out to Halley. And they picked up this guy. They gave him some blood there because he needed that, and then flew him back to Rothera, where he stayed overnight so that the doctor and the pilots could get some rest. And I was looking after him. He was actually okay during that night. And then he was flown back to Punta, and then from there on back to the UK. But it went amazingly smoothly, but it still took days and a couple of weeks to organise. Yeah, even with the right conditions.
Wow, God, the logistics must be mind-boggling.
Yes, I'm glad I'm not. Yeah, so that's all sorted out in the UK, and by several people all over the place. But they have all these plans in place in case this happens. But everyone is told that don't expect it because it might be the weather conditions aren't right. A lot of things you can't wait days or weeks, and all you've got is the one doctor and the facilities there. So everyone is screened. They all have medicals and good dental checks as well, because we're the dentist too, to make sure it's less likely, but obviously things do happen.
Yes. And they say that the Southern Ocean is the stormiest, most dangerous sea or ocean on Earth. Have you experienced any big storms while you've been on the ship?
We've had rough weather, but because we've got good weather forecasts, they tend to avoid when there's going to be storms. So they look for weather windows to do this sail. So we set off a little bit earlier than planned from the Falklands. So we're going kind of a slightly longer route where it's more sheltered, and just because there's been a weather window. But have experienced pretty rough weather down here. Yeah.
Yes. What's that like when it's really howling?
Well, you can't sleep because everything moves around. They don't have nice hammocks that move, so you're rolling backwards and forwards. You're listening to things crashing all over the place, and then I had to get up several times to check the sick bay to make sure what I was hearing wasn't everything breaking. My cabin's right next door to the surgery. Everyone's sort of going. And if you just got the crew on, it's not too bad because they're used to it. But when obviously you've got the passengers on, everyone's being sick, and you're trying to look after them all and make sure they're getting fluids and any medication they need to try and make it a little bit more pleasant for them, because seasickness is pretty awful.
Yeah, I bet. When you're on these big, well-equipped ships with weather forecasting and all the facilities, do you ever think about what it would have been like for Ernest Shackleton and his crew on their lifeboat traveling from the Weddell Sea up to South Georgia?
Oh yes, God. So when we were going to South Georgia last, we went past Elephant Island, and then it took, it seemed a pretty long time on a lovely ship that was going in definitely the right direction to get to South Georgia. I thought, God, to do that on a little boat without, the most basic of instruments. Yes, I think about them a lot when I'm down here, because you do go past all the places that I mentioned, all those stories. Yeah.
Yes, because I understand South Georgia, which is where Shackleton finally reached a whale station to get help for the rest of his men who were stuck on the other Elephant Island. That's on your itinerary. You're passing through there, aren't you?
To South Georgia?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've been there. We've already been. So we went there a few weeks ago to do some cargo off. We just anchored off. We weren't allowed ashore. I could look at the penguins from a distance and Shackleton's grave through some binoculars. Luckily, I have been there before, so I have seen it. And then we are probably going back there to pick up some people, but that's not confirmed because they were meant to be picked up by another ship. It's whether that ship can do that anymore. So yeah, we'll be heading back.
I see. And what's South Georgia like? Is there much there in terms of human habitation?
Oh, it is the most beautiful place I've been. Human-wise, no. There's just the British Antarctic Survey and the South Georgian government, which are all sort of in one place. And then it's just mountains and lots of penguins and seals, whales. And you can't fly there. So if they need to medevac anyone out, it has to be by ship. And then there's some people on Bird Island, and in winter they just have 3 of them there and no doctor. So they spend several months with just 3 people and a lot of seals.
Yes, I imagine, yes. But the wildlife in the Antarctic must be incredible. Have you managed to see much of it? Have you seen many kind of penguins or whales or any other wildlife while you've been down there?
Oh, yeah. So I'm usually a whale repellent, but this time it's been a little bit better. So from the bridge of the ship, we're seeing quite a few blows, quite a few. I think identifying them is difficult, but definitely humpbacks and some minkies and things. And then Rothera, we did get ashore, and I actually got to go back and say hello to all the penguins that I missed so much from when I was there last.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's really great, Bryony. So, Bryony, this is your 3rd time on an Antarctic research vessel. Now, I understand the vessels have had a checkered history, and unfortunately, the first, the HMS Endurance, it suffered a pretty major flood and nearly had to be abandoned. Can you tell me what happened?
So that was over 10 years ago, and actually that was a Royal Navy ship, not one of the research ships. But we did have British Antarctic Survey scientists and engineers on board, and we had a British school, it was British Schools Exploring Society in those days, British Exploring Society group on board as well. And we were just heading, we were going to head up to Chile for Christmas, and we had stopped just off Punta Arenas, or quite a way off Punta Arenas actually, and we had 2 helicopters on board, using that to get people off that weren't the ship's company. They were working on a valve, and I was chatting to a friend on a phone, and suddenly you heard casualty. So I rushed down to see what it was, and it was they were putting the cover back onto a valve they were working on, and suddenly the valve had opened and tons of water were just flooding into the engine room. The guy was just leaning slightly over this when it went, and luckily, if he was an inch further forward, it would have killed him probably. He just got a cut on his forehead and slightly concussed. So the whole engine room flooded. Fairly shortly after an hour or two, we lost all power. We weren't at anchor, so we were just floating without power. Talking about rough seas, we were, with bringing water on board too, which makes the ship more unstable, we were nearly potentially going over each time. And we were heading towards rocks. So we were making plans to abandon ship because we didn't really want to hit those rocks. And luckily there was one sandbank, because they had released the anchor, and the anchor took. So that stabilised us quite a bit. And then for the next 3 days and nights, bailing out, using the pumps, trying to stabilise the ship, and then got tugged back into Punta Arenas. And luckily no one got seriously hurt. There were a few close calls. And apart from the ship, which was it's had to be sent for scrap now.
Wow, that sounds like a terrifying experience.
Yeah, so the first few hours were, especially when they're talking about abandoning ship, you could definitely feel your adrenaline going. And people, it was a Royal Navy ship. We'd done a lot of drills, and actually that all came. It did work. People knew what to do, knew where to how to help. Everyone was helping out, even all the civilians on board as well, even though we did fly them off when it was stable enough to do so. But a lot of adrenaline. But once it had settled down and we were doing it, actually everyone was coming together, and it was very, very scary, but calmly done, I suppose.
Yes. Was this something that you, in the Navy, you drilled and prepared for, or did this come completely out of the blue?
You do prepare for floods. You do lots of drills for that. You do training when you're back in the UK. There's something called the DRU, where they have a big compartment that's set up like a ship. They flood it, and then you have to sort of try and stop the flood and bail out and things. And I always said, if the doctor's having to do this, the bailing out and stuff, then we should be abandoning ship. I was in the first aid posts, looking. It ended up doing more kind of management of the work and who could go back, rather than actually having any casualties. But luckily my feet did stay fairly dry.
Gosh, so close call.
Yes, yeah. There were a lot of things that could have gone wrong, and luckily it didn't. The safety of people.
Yeah, many people, Bryony, if that being their first experience of being in a ship in the Antarctic, might not have gone back, but you've been back since.
Because it stopped. It took out the ship short. I was meant to get down to Rothera and things, never got to go, so I had to find a way to go back down again. No,
So you felt there was unfinished business.
Definitely. I always wanted to go to Antarctica since I joined the Navy and saw that ship. Got to see a bit of it, and wanted to go down and see it properly and stay there. And so I did go back.
Brilliant. What is it about Antarctica that's really captured your imagination? That's drawn you back?
The beauty of it, the remoteness of it, the wildlife. I suppose part of it is the privilege of being somewhere where so few people do get to go. But I say the beauty. Some bits where we go is beautiful with the mountains. Some people love that completely flat white area. I'm not so sure about that, but the Rothera and South Georgia and places like that with mountains and penguins and things, that's the part of Antarctica that I love.
Well, it's been great chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time. It's amazing that the line is so good, given that you're currently full steam on a ship in the Drake's Passage in the middle of the Southern Ocean, and I can hear you very clearly. It's what an age to live in. Yeah, no, it's definitely improved a lot in the last few years, and just having 30 crew members and not all the passengers on does help a lot at the moment. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, on behalf of everyone at World Extreme Medicine, We wish you the best of luck with the rest of your trip. It's fantastic having you as a member of our faculty, and we look forward to seeing you back in the UK safely soon.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Bryony.